Welcome, everybody. This is Far From the Tree, a podcast where you can learn, laugh, and even cry with your host, us, mother and daughter duo. Welcome, everybody. This is Far From the Tree, a podcast where you can learn, laugh, and even cry with your host, us, mother and daughter duo, Jamie Dawn and Tatiana Maisel. I am a ICF leadership coach and astrologer. Tatiana is a resident therapist dedicated to be of service to others through our gifts and experiences in life. So get comfy and share the sacred space with us. Who knows what fruit may fall in your lap as you tune in to Far From the Tree. Thank you, everybody, for listening. And welcome, Tatiana.
Welcome.
Glad you're here. We are actually recording this first episode of our mini series on parenting and children. And before we jump into that, want to do a little check-in weather report. What's it like in your world?
Feels like wearing a bikini in December when it's nice out. I'm sticking to it.
All right. What does that mean?
Optimism.
Oh, I like it.
Mm-hmm.
Nice. I feel a little uninhibited and like I should have a filter on my mouth today, but I don't know.
Today?
What does that mean?
You know what that means.
Yeah, we might get into this, but it's noteworthy that I didn't hide a lot of things from you and your brother growing up.
Mm-mm.
My transparency was something that was definitely a value of mine. Sometimes a little
Transparent or uninhibited? Thoughtless sometimes.
I would say thoughtless at times. Sometimes he was like, wait. Why did I just say that? Why am I talking?
Mm-hmm.
Did that just come out of my mouth? Oh, I'll never be able to get that one back.
For everyone listening, I'll have you know this woman told me when I was like, I don't know, in elementary school. I was probably like 8, and I watched The Mummy, and it was awesome, right? Except that I was scared because the guy got his tongue clipped out, and I said, Mom, can you lose your tongue? Is that possible? Can you swallow it? Very innocently. And she says, oh, yeah, totally. If you clip the frenulum, and walks away. But to me, I had no idea what that meant. And literally her just saying, yeah, and nothing else. I had the fear of losing my tongue from then on. So now that I'm older, I understand how that process works. But 8 years old, no, not quite.
Yeah, there's a thing called age appropriateness and filters and
yeah.
Hence why I joke that you're a therapist because of me. Why did Tatiana go into therapy? Well, look at her mother. To show that she can be. Well, that's a perfect segue into our mini series on parenting and children.
Excellent.
In this first episode, we're going to set a foundation for the first relationships that we ever have, which is with our parents, whether they are present or absent, it doesn't matter. That is our first incarnation relationship once we are born. But Tatiana, I want to know, what's your earliest childhood memory?
For some reason, I think it's about being at church with Nana and Papa when I was like 4. But I feel like I have something else. I just can't pinpoint it.
People don't remember, or believe me when I say I actually remember being about 18 months old and living in North Carolina in this greenhouse and going to the A and White store, or A&P, red and white store called A&P. Anyways, and I had at one point, the very first memory I have is sitting in the middle of the road and my mother, your Nana, screaming out, going, get out of the road. You're not allowed to be there. It's very dangerous.
Crawl in there? Did you walk there?
I walked. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Just sat down in the middle of the road.
Okay.
Yeah. What does that tell you about my first relationship with my mother? That she somehow I got away to go in the road.
Well, I mean, it speaks to her. She came to save you, so.
Very true.
Mm-hmm.
Very true. But diving into the relationship, yeah, but believe it or not, I remember that. I can tell you, I can still see it in my mind's eye. The house, I can see the underneath. It was on not stilts, but
Like
what's this?
risers.
Risers. It was
Hmm.
on some, just like 3-foot risers. So you could
Hmm.
crawl under the house, and there was a fence, a backyard, but it was more like a side yard kind of backyard fence. And then we had a German Shepherd, a white German Shepherd named Jeanette.
Hmm.
And I just see it very vividly. And she was pregnant. She had 12 pups in that litter.
Good
I
God.
know. I know. So craziness. But as we're setting the foundation here for parent
Mm.
child and our first experiences in relationships, tell me a little bit about what you have experienced with parenting, and not that you're a parent, but from parenting and the relationship with, say, me and with your father.
Um, it's a loaded question. I don't know where to start. Okay, let me take it back for a second. So you said that you remember 18 months.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was in my diagnosis class, my professor, who's awesome at the time, was talking about we were talking about reactive attachment disorder. And that is in kids. Most of the time that's seen in kids that have been in and out of foster care or through the adoption system, anything like that. Where they want to be with caregivers, but just can't do it. They can't do it. And she had said that a lot of them have memories from being in the womb.
Really?
Their trauma goes back that far. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not out of the, I guess it is out of the ordinary. It's probably a very small percent that actually remember that stuff. But when you said that, I'm like, yeah, okay,
Yeah.
I hear that.
Yeah.
But relationship with our parents. Okay, well, I've always very felt very safe with you, and I've always appreciated that. And I wish I could say the same for my dad. Like, I love him dearly. Um, but I have had to do a lot of work because of certain reactions that I got out of him and or that he gave me. And um certain things that have been said when I was a kid that were said impulsively without him thinking. While you have said some thoughtless things that weren't as like
Like,
harmful, even though I carry them, the other ones didn't. His unfortunately criticized my being in a sense. Like that's how I internalized them. And so now, as an adult, after reading parenting books, and I will say that I read parenting books for the parents of the teens that I see, to give them tools and resources, I found it to be very healing. And I had a moment in, I think it was December, this past December, where I was just thinking about it and listening to the tools that were, playing through the audiobook, and just like, wow, like these are awesome. Imagine it. Like I would have benefited from all of this. I would have benefited greatly. And if other people have these tools, like they would probably also benefit, because it really goes back to what's important to me, which is right connection over correction. Kids are seeking to connect when they're having a temper tantrum, when they're excited, when they're scared, anything. They seek out their caregivers so that they can feel safe. And sitting there realizing that y'all were so young, 19 and 21 when I was born, kids raising children, that you didn't have these tools, especially because like, you were fed the parenting tips of the time, and probably also from y'all's parents who were fed stuff from their parents and so on and so forth. Like you didn't have the tools. And so I sat there in December and I was just thinking about it like, wow, like I forgive you because you didn't have these tools. Like, how could you know? Like, how
yeah,
could you know that I would need something else?
right.
Because you didn't know that I needed it, and you didn't know that you needed it either.
Yeah. That's absolutely beautiful, because in the relationships that we deal with now as adults, it is a projection of how we were raised and what
Mhm.
tools we had available to us at that time. And, as much as I know my parents love me, and I know, and I do love them, and they meant well, and they did the best that they could with what they had. But I was that child that was left in her room for hours throwing a temper tantrum when all I wanted was to connect,
Hmm.
and to be seen, and of course to get what I wanted,
Sure.
but there were power struggles between me and my father, and there was aloofness between me and my mother. And
Hmm.
so there was, now I genuinely, uh, like I said, love them both. And I know that they meant well in their parenting.
Hmm.
But, you know, one thing that my father says to me, and anybody listening, they're called Nana and Papa to Tatiana. One thing that Papa said to me many times over is, if you see something that we're doing as parents that you don't like, do it differently. And so that was one of the voices that I carried with me as a 19-year-old mother is, okay, I saw that my parents believed in corporal punishment. I don't.
Hmm.
I saw that if, my child was, if I was having a temper tantrum, I was meant to, or I was left on my own. I'm not doing that to my kid,
Hmm.
those kind of things. So I started projecting some of my own wounding onto my parenting style. And I
Hmm.
think that's the thing that we often do as adult parents, is that we just project. And of course, like you're pointing to, the younger we are, we haven't even worked through our shit yet. So now I'm
No.
projecting a lot of my shit onto you, right?
Hmm. It's kind of funny that he said, if you don't like what we're doing as parents, do it differently, as opposed to, I'm going to change because you don't like it right now.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Hmm. I like that point. I'm going to chew on that one for a while, because
Hmm.
really, I was listening to a podcast not too long ago on empathy, and
Hmm.
how we often will empathize, take on somebody else's stuff. And children are great with empathy. They absorb what the parents' reactions are, they absorb what their friends are doing or their siblings or whatever. But we don't stop and think about the reverse part of it, of how we're making the other person feel.
Hmm.
And that's at the reverse side of the empathy. It's like, oh, okay, I feel like this is not appropriate
Right.
behavior on the parenting side, but the parent doesn't feel, what am I doing to the child? Right.
Right. I think a lot of parents see it as, it's my job to be your parent. It's not my job to be your friend. It's my job to make sure that you're safe and in line and obedient. But I think nowadays people are kind of changing that, where yes, they want their kids to be safe and they want them to fall in line to an extent, but they're not doing it in the way that it was done before.
Right.
They're doing that responsive parenting thing, right? But that's what I, through those readings, have learned, right? It's responsive. If a kid's throwing a temper tantrum, they don't need to be put in timeout to think about throwing a temper tantrum. That's not what they're doing. They're not spending their time thinking about throwing a temper tantrum. They're spending their time thinking, like, why am I unloved? Why does nobody want to be around me? What is the problem? I just wanted to play. They don't have that foresight. It's not possible. Like, and I tell all of my parents that have teenagers, I'm like, look, guys, we've all been there, but there is I'm sorry, Rosie is walking around and tripping me out. Rosie's my dog, y'all. Um, the prefrontal cortex is not developed until you're 25. So, and that's foresight, that's judgment, impulse control. It's the reason probably why you can't rent a car until you're 25. But a 15-year-old, oh, why can't she think about these things? She can, but not in the way you can.
Right.
It's not possible. It's physically not possible unless for some reason her brain speeds up, or his brain, their brain, whatever, speeds up and does this. It's not going to happen. So they don't have that judgment. Why did you go out at night with your friends? Because it sounded like fun. That's why they went out. It sounded like a good time.
Why did you sneak out of the house?
It was fun. It was great
It
because I
was
wanted to go to Taco Bell and hang out with my best friend. That's why. This was
Yes.
exciting.
It was 3 o'clock in the morning.
I was out before that.
Well, I know, because I was woken up at 3 a.m. to come get your ass.
I told Lake, I told Lake, I was like, look, I'm going for a walk. He's like, all right, cool. Him and Diego were hanging out. But I lost my phone on the beach, so I couldn't answer his phone call. And he's like, I'm sorry, I had to tell mom. I'm like, no, I'm not mad at you. It's okay. It's for safety. But like, I'm grounded.
For life.
Right. Anyway.
But in I won't digress into that.
Right.
I'll save that for another episode. Going back to our foundation of our first time relationships with parents and child and that sort of thing. Why is it important for parents to be acutely aware? What are you doing with that dog? I know you're about to take a picture and show me what she's doing. Great. I love her. Oh, okay. Well, I'm not editing this part. It's too cute. Good. But why is it important for parents and children in this first interaction to have healthy attachment and healthy relationship?
It sets the foundation for what they do in life and other relationship, essentially. And it can be changed. So you can have a fairly secure attachment and be with somebody that's very insecure and they start leaking into you. And it can alter your attachment style. At the same time, if you are secure, you can help other people heal from their insecure attachment and they can flourish. And that's called earn secure. So every attachment style is normal because it's just how it develops, right? And you can have different attachment styles to different people.
Yeah.
So with you, I have a secure attachment. With most other relationships, I have an anxious attachment style. With my partner, I now have an earned secure attachment because we were able to work through our stuff together. And of course, the anxiousness still comes out at times, especially when I'm feeling down about myself, like when my self-esteem is feeling kind of low.
Yeah.
But it has nothing to do with him. And I know that has everything to do with me and how I'm feeling. And I have to check myself on it.
Yeah, for sure. I imagine the world in a place where children now are born into families, into adults who are actually mature and can create that secure attachment for them.
And I think that's a lot of why people, it's not the only reason, but it's a lot of why people are waiting to have kids later these days. Obviously, the world is turning in a very weird direction. And I think that's a lot of it. Also, finances and the economy are not what they used to be. It doesn't support us having kids in the same manner. Like we used to be able to, one person used to be able to work 40 hours a week and support a family of 4. That was the American dream. And now 2 people have to work for a total of 80 hours a week to support a family of 4 and just make it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
It's not the same. There was a video that I saw that was like, I think it was a 35-year-old woman. And she was like, yes, I don't have the same vigor and endurance and energy that I would have had if I was 20 something having this kid, but I do have a greater self-awareness that I can raise a healthy child. I can raise a child that is not going to suffer from my insecurities and the issues that I have because I have worked through them to this point.
Yep.
And of course, it's going to come up because kids trigger things that are still inside of us. And of course, triggers can come up even if we've like worked through things. But it's also up to us at that point to recognize what it is.
Yeah. And I will say that in my work with adults in the coaching world is that I'm usually catching those adults who didn't get that kind of self-awareness as children and then into adulthood. And so one of my passions is to bring in greater self-awareness so that they can lead better and not just lead in their work life, but in their home life too. Mm-hmm. And so it is super important, that self-awareness. And, I had this debate with your grandparents many times over about why you and your brother not having kids yet. And it's like, I don't want them to have kids until they have figured themselves out, because our very first relationship, yes, is with our parents, but the most important one is one with ourselves. Because if we're not right inside of us, if we think we're broken, if we think there's something wrong with us, we're going to constantly project that onto the relationships, onto our decision-making, our behaviors, that sort of thing. And so you've had time to work through these issues.
Mhm.
And to be able, if you and your partner ever decide to have an actual child besides a dog, you're much more self-aware now that you'll be able to parent very differently than your dad and I did.
It's true. I mean, I practice with Rosie as it is because I think it's good practice. Like, and I'm constantly trying to better shape the language that I use, especially like even on here, if I, go back and correct myself, it's a process for me to do it.
Right.
With her, I'm like, oh, baby, like you're confused. It doesn't feel okay right now, but I promise it'll make sense soon, right? Because we're moving, everything's packed up. It's weird.
Right.
She's like, where is my home? What is this? I know you're confused. I can't,
Right.
I mean, obviously you're not getting what I'm saying to you, but I'm here.
Yeah. Well, it gives you practice. And, I won't digress into animals, but I do believe animals have that feeling or that sense in them that they can sense when something is different, or,
Oh, yeah.
they don't obviously use the language that we use,
Mhm.
but you can see it in their body language. You can see it on their face. Believe me, Rosie is so animated. I swear, we always say there's a little human in there.
She's an
So,
alien. I don't know.
yeah, for sure. Well, look at her mom.
Mhm. Thanks.
Well,
I'm
I
gonna say,
mean,
look at her grandmother.
okay. Doesn't fall far from the tree.
That's correct.
You know, that just is a beautiful segue into the fact that infants and young children are ruled by their feelings, and
Mhm.
how important in this foundation of parent-child relationship to be able to honor our feelings, to give language to them, or to give something that validates them, right? And we as adults only think about the consequences of the action. We don't think about the emotions or the feelings that go along with it.
Right.
So, what would you advise or offer in your learning that would help children process? If I was a new parent, or if I was an authority figure of some sort, what would you offer that would help children process feelings, and help the adult help the child process those feelings?
Talk to your kids. Never stop talking to your kids. Like, if you guys are reading in the womb to your kids baby books, you're playing music for them, you're talking to your partner, you're talking to the belly bump, that doesn't stop when you give birth. It never stops. You have to talk to your kids. Most of the teens that I see are there because they feel like their parents don't understand. And to an extent, that's correct, because teens now are living in a different time. They have different things going on for themselves. But to an extent, their parents, they do understand. They were a teenager once. They understand concepts like body image and pain and breaking up with someone you care about. They understand those things. They've been there.
Yeah.
But like with kids are very much in the present moment. That's it. They can't really think about what comes next or what already happened. That doesn't develop yet. So if they're frustrated, you can see it on their face, like, they kicked over my blocks. They're not going to say that. You're probably going to see them building blocks, someone coming over, kicking over the blocks, and then your kid pushing that kid. And that's it. That's natural for them. They don't have words to say, you kicked my blocks. I'm upset because I worked really hard to build that and you messed it up. Please don't do that again. No, what 4-year-old is going to use that language?
Exactly.
Not possible. So you go over to your kid, hey, I can see you're really frustrated. You worked really hard to build that. You did a really good job. And then I saw you push your friend, and that doesn't seem to be quite right, does it? It probably wouldn't feel good if you got pushed either. Talk to your kid. I know why you did it. You know what? If I was you, I might have done the same thing. Validate them, talk to them, give them that emotion word, give them that action word, give them a sentence, anything. The same goes for like hiding processes from them. Someone's dying, someone's grieving, we're moving, we're expecting another kid, anything. Like, talk to your kid. They don't like being left in the dark. It doesn't mean they can handle everything, but they know when something's going on. Let them know the bare minimum that they can handle so that they don't feel left out.
Yeah.
And that's where temper tantrums come from and all these other behaviors. Like, kids will have behavioral issues, quote unquote, because they don't have the words for it.
And as adults, We have our own behavioral issues that we carry. We may not throw temper tantrums outwardly, but look at all the violence that's going on in the world right now. Look at what's happening even internally. We're harming ourselves by having all these internal stresses and processes because we don't know how to give a language to what's really going on. So you're
Right.
absolutely right. Communication is key. And
Right.
when I'm working with adults, in that realm, and we talk about communication, we talk about, when I see a body language change as we're doing a session, very often I will say, I'm noticing a change in your body language. Can you
Mhm.
tap into your body and tell me what's happening inside of you?
Mhm.
That's self-awareness, because that's something else that I feel is key for kids, is to get them back in the body as well. They may not be able to say, I feel anger in my stomach, right? But they may
Right.
say, my tummy hurts,
Mhm.
or it's tight,
Mhm.
or I can't breathe, things like that. And so
Mhm.
getting back into that body sense will also give some language around it.
Absolutely. I think when parents are particularly dismissive or invalidating by either ignoring or saying, no, you're okay, it's okay. It's one, it's literally not okay for them right now.
Right.
Whatever it is, it's not okay. But they learn to ignore that for themselves.
Right.
And that's how it leads into adulthood, where it's like, oh, a stomach ache, I'm fine.
Yeah.
But that stomach ache persists and it persists and it persists. And maybe it is just a stomach ache. Maybe it's anxiety, though. Maybe it's indigestion. Maybe it's cancer. But because they've learned to ignore those cues, they don't go and ask for help.
Yeah.
It can lead to way worse things as we get older by being told, like, you're okay, or being ignored,
Yeah.
even.
Yeah. Well, we know the age old messages between gender, right? Boys are taught to be tough and don't cry and throw some dirt on it and get back out there, kind of thing. And girls are taught to be the good girl and be the people pleaser. Don't make waves. Everybody show up cute and pretty, right? And so we have to keep unbinding those stereotypes, or those what would you call it? The categories of how we show up. We're human beings, regardless of the gender. And it was funny because
Correct.
growing up, I could never really articulate it other than my rebellious nature, where every time my father would scold me about doing something that being too tomboy, not ladylike enough, or too tough, or whatever, it was like, I can do anything that a boy can do. You can't do that because you're not a boy, or something like that would be projected onto me. I'm like, I don't care about gender. If I'm capable of doing something, then let me do it. Right.
Right.
So trying to deconstruct and unbind all of that has been a lifelong process for me. And
Mhm.
I've used my woundedness to try and get there. But now that I have some greater self awareness, I can see it in a very different way, of just, much gentler, if you will. But yeah, those foundations for me created a lot of my personality.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That can lead into talking about like toxic masculinity and toxic femininity. Like, for those of you that are listening that only know about toxic masculinity, please know that the pendulum goes the other way. Toxic femininity exists
yep.
and it needs to be acknowledged.
Yeah, absolutely.
Anything that's extreme is usually not sustainable and it's usually not in our best interest.
Right.
So I was talking with a client about this yesterday, but finding that balance is key. And it's a matter of how we get there, right? And I'm talking to someone who has a lot of masculine traits because they've always had to do everything for themselves. They can't rely on other people. They, they're overworking, but this is also a lot of that toxic femininity. I'm overworking myself. Mom's got my back. Mom was the hard worker. She ate the meal last and made sure that we got everything. She went to bed and probably got 2 hours of sleep so we could go to school on time and was working full time. All of these things, overextending yourself, like,
Right.
it's not healthy.
It's not. Take it from one workaholic mother to to many. I mean, let me just tell you, there are some things in my life. I don't know that regret is the right word, but I'm ashamed of my unconscious behavior, if you will, because I wasn't aware. I was more driven by making sure I provided and showed up for you and your brother, that I would be in the middle of a wrestling match or a soccer match or whatever, and all of a sudden it's like, oh, I got to go, I've got to work. and I would miss something and then I'd come back. I mean, I wasn't able to, I didn't give myself permission to be fully present.
But can I tell you that the simple act of you just being there was enough?
Thank you for that. I appreciate
Truly.
that. Thank you. Not
Okay,
everybody
well,
sees that way though, right? I mean, my interpretation is I wasn't fully present as a parent.
sure, and that's fair. At the same time, when I know that maybe you're the only parent that shows up consistently to soccer games, to practices, to wrestling matches, to CrossFit competitions, weightlifting, whatever, that means more than you having to take a client call for 10 minutes and missing a goal. At least
Fair
you're
enough.
there.
Fair enough. I like that. Thank you. Oh,
You're welcome.
she just took off the cross.
Absolved.
I was, yes, I was
Yeah.
going to say, the cross is gone.
Mm-hmm.
I'll stop climbing up and maybe I'll leave my bucket and nails. We'll see.
Yeah. Take time. Dr. Nicole LaPera, who is on Instagram, the holistic psychologist, and she has a podcast, Self Healer Soundboard, that she does with one of her partners, talks about good enough parenting. And good enough parenting, she's like, it's like 55%. It's like, you're going to mess up. You're going to have bad days. You're going to have bad moments. You're going to have things where you feel like you regress, where you do yell at your kid. But again, it's about doing good enough 55% of the time that usually they're going to turn out just fine. Talk to your kids, repair, apologize. Oh my God, please apologize to your kids. Please say, I'm sorry for yelling at you. That was not right of me. I will try my best not to do that in the future, because I know that doesn't feel very good. I'm sure you were very scared and I didn't make you feel very safe when I did that. Anything. Say I'm sorry to your kids. It teaches accountability, it teaches responsibility, and it helps them be able to do it as they go into adulthood.
Absolutely.
For the longest time, I could not take ownership of when I messed up, because if I messed up, that means someone was going to be mad at me. And I couldn't take that.
Right.
And so a new practice for me, and by new, I mean like with my current partnership and probably in the last like year or two with coworkers and others, saying, I apologize. That's my bad. I'm sorry.
Yeah. Yep. That is one thing that I was actually preached at growing up. I mean, I did witness this from Nana and Papa, is that every time there was an argument, which seemed like World War III, that was the trauma. But every time there was an argument, they'd end up in the bedroom talking, hashing it out, whatever, but they would always come out holding hands, and they would turn to each other and say, I apologize for da 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 da. I apologize for da 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 da. Please forgive me. I mean, that was the standard practice every time something showed up. So I witnessed and was given the example of asking for forgiveness, of owning it. I ended up interpreting it into, I am responsible for everything and everyone because I don't want those blowups to happen. So I've been unbinding a lot of that in my adult life of, I'm responsible for everybody's pain. Or if something goes wrong, yeah, I'm responsible for it. And see, this goes back to that early childhood foundation of how kids interpret what their parents do or what their parents don't do or what they say, right? I mean, it's so important to be aware of who we are as adults before we start projecting onto these kids, and being able to check in, like you're talking about, communication, checking in. Where are we? Yes, I have had moments, and you may or may not even think about it or remember it, but where I was exhausted as a young parent, and I was busy. I was too focused on work, and I was like, I don't have time to sit here and have a long conversation about how you're feeling, And there was moments like that, and I remember, for me, I would carve out dedicated space to check in, to talk, if I couldn't, because I knew that I didn't give it to you in that moment. So
Dr. Becky talks about that. She wrote Good Inside, and that's also the title of her podcast. But she talks about, I'm going to mess up what the acronym is, but it's essentially parent and child focused time, like 10 to 15 minutes once a day, 3 times a week, whatever it is, where it's just, this is our time for 10 to 15 minutes with no distractions, no other people. Maybe it's playing, maybe it's going to the park, maybe it's a conversation or a walk or cooking or whatever. where you get my undivided attention and that's it. We don't have to talk about issues. We don't have to talk about anything. I just want you to know that I'm here. I'm here for you.
Yeah.
And that can be very healing for the kid, especially like maybe it's not the time to have, maybe, you know, you've set a block of time for that, but the kid is having a hard time. Maybe a temper tantrum comes out, maybe, you know, some pouting or whatever. Okay, well, maybe now it's time to move up that set amount of time to spend with that kid. Oh, I see you're having a hard time. Focus on that connection. That's what they're needing right now.
Yeah. You know, you go back to infancy, right? Infants can't communicate other than crying, other than, you know, maybe a smile or two. But I mean, you know, they're in distress or they need something because they're crying about it. You can't get upset with the child if their belly hurts or they're hungry or their diaper needs changed, you know? And we forget that as we get older. You and I were talking not too long ago. This will go into another episode about boundaries, but how infants are brilliant at boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, Nedra Tawwab said that, and I thought that was like life changing. You know, it's funny because you had asked earlier about, well, not asked, but had stated that, you know, gender, like certain rules are put on us, right? Babies don't have that. Regardless of gender, they're going to cry, they're going to scream, they're going to coo, they're going to try and crawl and walk and all these things, right? It transcends. But when they get to a certain point, those gender roles or gender norms imposed by the family or society or whatever, or culture, they come in and things start to change. And in some cultures, yes, it is very important to maintain that if you're part of that culture. But speaking about like American culture, boys, yes, shut up, rub some dirt in it. You don't cry, you're fine, ignore it, push it down. Okay, and that's going to lead to a bunch of other issues down the line. Substance use, dissociation, depression, undiagnosed things, ADHD, whatever, right? Girls, you know, oh, you can cry, but if you cry too much, you're too sensitive. Please be the good girl. Please get in line. Make sure your grades are right. And it's that conditioning, right? Dr. Again, Nicole LePera talks about good girl conditioning, but she had also mentioned the same thing for boys, like emotions, feelings, expression, like they transcend gender, they transcend roles, they're a human experience. It's a human thing to have them. And we should all be allowed to feel them. And I think as we move into the future, we've started doing that for sure. And I think it's going to continue to that point that it's going to be okay for everybody. At least that's what I hope. My vision of the future is like the Fifth Element. That's what I see. Like everyone is cohabitating. It's a bunch of blue people and like, you know, people in weird suits, things are flying, different roles, like whatever. But everyone is there. Different species, it's humans and a bunch of alien species and all this stuff, different language. Like, why can't feelings and expressing them be part of that future?
absolutely. It is. It's what makes us human.
Mm-hmm.
That is one of the things that really helps us stand out from a lot of things. It's what gives us life. It's part of what validates us, you know, to have life is our emotions. So, final question for this episode. Wasn't sure exactly what direction it was going to go, but how can we parent ourselves if one or both of our parents were not available or did not validate us in some way?
As an adult or as a child?
As an adult. Or I'm sorry, how do we parent ourselves as adults selves now if our parents were not available or absent from us?
It takes work. It takes a lot of healing. It takes going through the process if you want to, if you want it, if it's important to you. Again, some people are okay with how things are. They don't believe they need to change or change anything about what they've been through or acknowledge it or whatever. But for those that do feel the sting of the past, there's a lot of resources out there that can help you heal from your childhood. My therapist turned me on to Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, and they give a lot of Dr. Lindsay Gibson gives a lot of tools, a lot of self-reflection exercises And then she's got 2 other books that follow along with that. And then Healing Your Lost Inner Child by Robert Jackman was awesome. Also there's a workbook that you can buy. It follows right along with the book. But then there's an extra section in the workbook after you move through the part 1, which again goes with the book. It's extra stuff that you get to do. But talking to yourself as your wise older parent that you didn't have can be helpful. Thinking about the things that you wish were done differently and doing them for yourself or to yourself can be helpful. Doing things opposite, if those things hurt you, can be helpful. There's a lot of ways to go about reparenting yourself.
Absolutely. I liked the practice of taking on the archetype of the good mother or the good father, and what would the good mother do in this case for me, and what would the good father do in this case for me, and being able to work with that. The other thing that for me that has been effective is the loudest voice in my head when I was a young adult was my father's. So replacing that voice with my own good father's voice. Right. Or I watched that. It seemed as though my mom, she's shy and she doesn't talk a lot. So I would see that as she didn't speak up for herself. Right. So what would the good mother do? How would she use her voice and say what she needed to say? So those are 2 of the things that I work with a lot.
I like that.
Yeah. So
being the kind voice to yourself, the kind person that you needed.
Absolutely. Well, I love you. Thank you for this episode. I can't wait for our next one. Thanks everybody for listening. Have such a good week, or, enjoy.
Enjoy.
And come find us.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks everybody for listening, for watching, and being a part of this podcast. And we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining us, y'all.